So we're on part 2 of chapter 1, What is Psychology? And we're looking at the 8th edition David Myers AP Psychology textbook. So here's just a nice comparison of a descriptive, correlational, and experimental research studies. So when we look at statistical reasoning, please understand that you can take stats and you can manipulate them however you want. So what we need to do when we look at stats is we need to look at underlying stuff that goes along. We have to look at how to analyze information and how to interpret the data. So when we describe data, it's a meaningful description of data is important in research, and any kind of misinformation or misrepresentation can lead to incorrect conclusions. So the guy who came out a long time ago saying that autism was being caused by vaccines, by our children getting too many vaccines, what they found out about his data is that there was a misrepresentation in his data, and it came up to incorrect conclusions. That autism, there's not a correlation between autism and the actual vaccines. So mode, mean, medium. Mode is the most frequently occurring number in our scores, in our distribution. Mean is the average, so just add up all your numbers and divide it by that. And then medium is just the middle score in a rank ordered system. So medium, middle score. Mean is just the average, so however many numbers you add it up together, take that and divide it. And then mode is the most frequently occurring. So when you look at numbers, you can manipulate them however you want. So teacher's pay is a classic example. You know, teacher's pay is typically right here about 30 to 35,000, but for the superintendent of the county, he could be up here the 475. If you throw in that 475 with that 30,000, of course it's going to make the middle, the mean number look better. So what you need to look at is what the average could be. You need to look at the middle number, and you need to look at the most frequently occurring. So when we look at range, range is just the difference between the highest and the lowest score. And then standard deviation is how much the score varies around the mean. So remember the IQ thing. So the standard deviation for IQ is 15. So the average IQ is 100. And then when you look at you look at the next number is 115, and then you look at 130. And anything over 130 is considered intelligent, like highly intelligent. We're talking genius. And then we look at from 100, we look at 85, and then we look at 70. Anything 70 and below is considered our special needs population. So standard deviation is just varying around the mean. So statistical statements of how frequently an obtained result occurred by experimental manipulation or by chance. So you need to look at inferences and you need to look at stats. So when is an observed difference reliable? We have to look at representative samples. They're better than our biased ones. So you need to look at something that is actually representative of the population. Less variable observations are more reliable than more variable ones. So you need to look at something that's pretty reliable. And we need to look at far more cases than fewer cases. So the more you can repeat the experiment, the better off your numbers are going to be. So when is a difference significant? When sample averages are reliable and the difference between them is relatively large, we say the difference has statistical significance. And so when you look at that, what you kind of need to look at is, was there an impact on your numbers based on the average? And so now we just look at frequently asked questions in psychology. So can labs actually simulate the everyday life? Yes, I mean, they do the best job they can. The goal is just to look at the behavior, the underlying stuff. Does behavior depend on one's culture? You know, culture does vary across, our behaviors do vary across cultures, but there are relatively things, you know, there are some relative things that are the same. Then does behavior vary with gender? Yeah, you know, females are more emotional, guys are more factual based. When we look at why psychologists actually look at animals, it's perfectly legitimate that psychologists look at animals. Remember, when experimenting with animals, 1, you have to treat them humanely. 2, new information has to be gathered in the experiment. And 3, the information actually has to be applicable to humans. So you actually have to be able to transfer the knowledge to humans. So in psychology, they never allow experiments to just keep going on. Like, you can't keep repeating the same experiment if no new information is going to be gathered. And after the experiment is done, the animals have to be treated humanely. And so there's whole like psychology, like lab sets up for these animals afterwards. So is it ethical to experiment on animals? Yes, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get something that is going to help humans out. Is it ethical to experiment on people? Yeah, you have to get informed consent. Informed consent means that the people are participating willingly in the experiment. The second thing is you have to make certain that your participants are free of psychological or physical harm. There's nothing going to be permanently damaged. And then 3, you actually have to explain the experiment to the participants afterwards. So once you actually experiment on them, you have to explain the whole procedure again to them. So like a Milgram study, they had to explain to the participants they weren't really like electrocuting people in the back room. Is psychology free of value judgment? Nothing is, guys. Everybody has a personal biasness, a set of values. So that's where we have to be careful when we look at psychology. Is psychology potentially dangerous? It can be, but it's not meant to be, and it's not. The purpose of psychology is supposed to help people out with dealing with problems like war, hunger, prejudice, crime, any sort of dysfunction. So this is what we're looking at, Chapter 1, what is psychology? Make sure you can set up a scientific method. Make sure that you can look at how to do research experiments, that you know the difference between the independent and dependent variable. And that's what you need to know for Chapter 1, what is psychology?